Hello there. Have you been reading the PMBOK guide? Found it to be very heavy, cumbersome? Maybe you're just starting. Let's talk about the 49 processes of the PMBOK guide 6th edition. We're going to do this pretty quick. We've got a longer version out there on YouTube. To find the longer version, click on the I button at the top right corner of this video to view the 45-minute version. There are 49 processes in the PMBOK guide 6th edition, and they're broken out by process group. These process groups are not meant to be done in linear rotation. Some people read the PMBOK guide and they go through the order of the chapters and they think project management is meant to be in that fashion. No, it's not. Project management is extremely situational, dynamic, and iterative. For that reason, do not think of the processes as being in any strict order. In the real world, things happen out of order quite a lot, but there is some logic to what should happen at a high level first before other things happen. So the first thing that should happen on any project is the initiating of the project. So in the initiating process group, the very first process talked about in the PMBOK guide is develop project charter. This is where the project is authorized. There is an authorization document known as the project charter that is an output of this process. Also, we begin to document constraints and assumptions at a high level, and then we go into detail. For that reason, the assumption log is also an output of the develop project charter process. Bear in mind that develop project charter could happen at predefined points throughout the project to authorize phases or other segments within the project. Identify stakeholders, our next process, is where stakeholders are identified and analyzed. This is not a one-time event, but it happens all throughout the project. And the major output of this is called a stakeholder register. As part of analyzing stakeholders, the project manager should look at their level of power, their level of interest, level of influence, probably determine what their attitude is. Hence, the stakeholder cube that will analyze their attitude, their power, and their interest, for example. The next process group is the planning process group. There are 24 processes here, and this is 24% of your exam. The first process here is develop project management plan. This is where the project management plan is put together. The project management plan is developed. This is a process that integrates everything else that happens after it, but it's also a process where direction and focus is created for everything that will happen after this process. In other words, direction and focus for how subsidiary plans will be developed, their look, their feel, and so on. The next process here takes us to another knowledge area called the scope management knowledge area, and this process is called plan scope management. Plan scope management is where the scope management plan that defines how to manage scope is developed. The scope management plan also defines how scope will be fleshed out in defining the scope and creating a WBS. Also, from this process, we get an output known as the requirements management plan. The next process here is collect requirements. This is where requirements are actually collected. We have a requirements traceability matrix that is an output of this process. And this maps requirements to their origin. It could be a rather useful document. The next process is known as define scope. In define scope, this is where we examine what is an inclusion and what is an exclusion for this project. This is documented in a scope statement, also called a project scope statement. Within the project scope statement, we also know what the major characteristics of the deliverable are. We have a deliverable description, and we are also taking another look at those constraints and assumptions to make sure that the entire scope of work needed to meet the requirements previously defined is all mapped out. The next process is create WBS. WBS stands for work breakdown structure, and this is a hierarchical decomposition of the project, the work to be done on the project, and it's in the form of a tree structure. It looks very much like a family tree. The next process here is plan schedule management. In plan schedule management, This is where the team creates a plan for how to develop and manage the schedule. There are lots of scheduling tools, but we need to be intentional about how our schedule is developed. How many people will be involved? When will it take place? How often will these tasks in the schedule be reviewed? The next process here is define activities, where these tasks in the schedule are first of all listed out. The major output is an activity list. The next process is where we sequence the activities by putting them in the logical order of occurrence. In the real world, people might define the activities and sequence them right away, but these are two distinct processes in the PMBOK guide. The next process is estimate activity durations. Based on an understanding of the resources available, which happens in a different process, we are then able to estimate activity durations for the different tasks. The next process is develop schedule. This is where the entire schedule comes together and all of the information that we have gleaned so far about milestones, tasks, and the durations is all put together into a project schedule. When that schedule is approved by management or stakeholders, it is then known as a schedule baseline.